All righty, and now we've got some special content because we got a present this past week. You and I both. A fellow named Mike Richardson contacted us on Twitter and had found some of the old Weasel's World of Wrestling, can't even call it a newsletter, sheets, literally sheets, that Norman Dooley, my old friend, the inventor of the star rating system, did back in the day. And we've talked about this, and this is not a hit piece on Uncle Dave Meltzer. He has actually admitted this and said this and talked about Norman Dooley and talked about Norman's newsletter and how that he took the star ratings from Norman and how that he took other things. And you can see when you go back and read these sheets, see some other things he took from Norman, but he's admitted that, and we've talked about it back before Dave lost his mind and decided to stab all of his old friends in the back in order to stay in good with the cool kids. We've had a discussion about Norman. And the thing is, a lot of people are going, well, why is this a revelation now? Cornette, you've got everything you've ever owned, especially related to wrestling. And this is a very weird story because Norman Dooley, as I mentioned, he's from New Albany, Indiana. He was a fan in the late 70s and the 80s, friend of mine. We met, and we'll talk about that, through wrestling, and Norman being another, to my knowledge at that time, the only other smart fan in the city of Louisville, Kentucky that was corresponding with other fans from different parts of the country, sending results and programs around. It was me and him, basically. And the weird thing about this is, Brian, I've told you the story. I've mentioned it before. But Weasel did all the results for all the matches around this area, both the Mid-Atlantic matches in Cincinnati and the Bruisers shows in Indianapolis. He used to go to St. Louis all the time to see matches at the Kiel Auditorium, and he was always at the Louisville Gardens. And sometimes he'd take trips with me to other matches in the territory. And he did these typed up, just legal-sized sheets. That's where really newsletters got called sheets in the early days, because everybody who did them just typed them up and got that sheet of paper Xeroxed, as we used to say, copied. I remember copies were 3 or 4 cents a piece when I was doing bulletins back in the 70s, but you could get the legal pad size copied for 5 cents, and you got more room, so it came out more economical. When I ended up moving back into the castle 20 years ago after my mom passed away and we had remodeling done and everything, we had cleaned the house out and taken everything over to the place I was living across town at the time. And then the work was done, and then we moved everything back. And here at my mom's house, I've mentioned she was a pack rat like I am. She still had all of my wrestling collection and all of my comic book collection. Everything that was in the house had still been here, except stuff I had taken with me on the road when I lived in Charlotte and then in Connecticut and et cetera, various wrestling collectibles. And I'd picked up a bunch more stuff at that time. Finally got it all together back in this house, everything that I owned, and still for years never had time to unpack anything. Finally, in 2013, when I took a year off after the Ring of Honor fiasco almost gave me a goddamn heart attack and brain aneurysm, one of the things that I did was go through all the boxes of old newsletters and results and clipping sheets and my notebooks from Louisville. And I did the Tuesday Night at the Gardens book on Louisville wrestling based off of my firsthand notes from 74, 75, and that era, along with all the clippings that I had collected and et cetera. And I did a first half of the 70s book on Louisville wrestling. But I was looking for the rest of my notebooks, and I had 76, 77, 78, 79. But then 1980 through 1982 was gone. I had no Weasel's Worlds. And because Weasel started typing the stuff up, and I was keeping handwritten, just, spiral notebooks, jotting things down on the fly at the matches, I said, well, fuck, I'll just use Weasel's sheets. because he's typed everything up where I can read it good, and the times and everything. They're gone. The only thing that I can figure is that there was so much stuff. When I moved from Connecticut back to Kentucky, and this not even counting my mom's house full of stuff, the movers said that it was one of the heaviest private homes they'd ever moved because of the amount of books and tapes and paper and documents. Then I put all that together with everything that was in my mom's house. I've got everything except any of my notes or any of Weasel's World newsletters from 1980 through 82. And then it's got stranger because we started going back, and you've tried this, Brian, and I've talked to a number of people. I still know people that are still living that were pen pals and correspondents of Norman Dooley's. And every time you go to them, they say, well, a flood happened, or I moved, or something happened. Nobody has these fucking sheets. And I mean, Weasel, he had at the time, 30, 40, 50 pen pals and names that, we remember from being friends and meeting at the wrestling conventions. Nobody can find these fucking sheets. And nobody has seen Norman Dooley in over 20 years. And people have been looking for him, especially as he's gotten talked about more recently in recent years as the guy who started the whole rating system and started the whole genre of sheet that Dave Meltzer picked up with The Observer and influenced his writing style. And the greatest guy in the world. Nobody can find him. Nobody can find his sheets. It's like everything just disappeared. And so finally, this past week, like I said, Mike Richardson, he contacted us on Twitter and sent us a big stack most of the year of 1981 and some before and a little bit after that. And it's refreshed my memory on shit that I saw in person 40-something years ago, as well as you've got a bunch of reasons why, Brian, why you love these sheets and love the talk of the smart fan population at the time and the way that all this happened, this generation of fans. My thing is, I'm most impressed or most interested because this is the same guy seeing different promotion matches all at the time they were happening and grading or describing or reacting to matches from those different promotions in an honest way. He was a fan. I was the only person when he met me. I was the only person that was vaguely even in the wrestling business because I was the photographer. Norman was purely a fan that got smart through his own, entrepreneurial efforts and was trading letters and correspondence with the other smart fans of the time, so you get an idea of how they talked and what they knew and what they didn't know, what they knew and what they didn't know, and what they felt about the wrestling that they were seeing. And, when you see that he watched Madison Square Garden matches, and I've told this story before, I was over there for one or two, and we snoozed all the way through the thing. But yet he'd go to a Memphis spot show because the matches were exciting, and that would be great in front of 1,000 people in Winslow, Indiana. The matches were better than Madison Square Garden. That's not me saying that. That's a fan that had no loyalty to anyone or wasn't beholden to anybody, wasn't trying to protect anybody's feelings, wasn't trying to get a job in wrestling, was just commenting on what he saw. That, to me, is some of the interesting shit, especially the way that not only wrestling has changed, but also how the smart fans have changed and the way that it's changed the way that they look at wrestling. Norman Dooley, as you go and read these sheets, in some ways was smarter than anybody currently working in the wrestling business today, because he knew that it wasn't about, the performance. It was about whether or not you believed in the guy or the guys and what they were doing. So anyway, we've got a bunch of these sheets here, and we're going to go through a few things. And Brian, you've been asking me questions all week, so hopefully you'll ask me some more so I can tell the people. But that's basically the thing, is that Norman was I think you put it, the middle generation. There was a generation of smart fans in wrestling in the late 60s, early 70s that were, Tom Burke up in Massachusetts and Dave Brzezinski up in Detroit, and the folks that ran the Wrestling Fans International Association, Don Wilson, and even our old friend and colleague Norm Keitzer kind of started out as a smart fan, Jim Melby. And then there was the post-Meltzer generation that started after 83 or 84, when it became much more numerous and much more common to have smart fans in every market. But from about the late 70s to the early 80s, the first generation of tape traders, the first generation of smart fans that had access to video and to more modern technology, that was me and Norman and a bunch of the people that went to the WFIA conventions, Walt Wilansky, Pete Lederberg, those guys. And that was a generation that kind of changed more in that period of time than the wrestling business did.
It's really interesting. If you look at the period of time from like 78 to 82, 83, that's really what it is. And when you talk before about why these are so special, we're going to talk a lot about them and some of the things in them, some of the revelations in them. But Norm Dooley was going to all these shows, St. Louis, various shows, eventually various shows in the territory for, what we call Memphis wrestling, but obviously it's not, everyone didn't call it that back then.
Right.
He was reviewing what he saw live, the big difference. And you could see Dave's, I don't want to say stole, because that's not right. Dave certainly was influenced by a lot of the writing style of Norman Dooley and how he critiqued wrestling, certainly the star ratings. The big difference, besides every now and then an MSG review that you guys watched on TV, he only reviewed, in Weasel's world, what he attended, as opposed to what he got on video. The Observer was about, these are the videos I got from around the world.
Well, see, Norman wasn't trying to do a bulletin per se on the happenings of the entire world of professional wrestling. He didn't cover Japan. He didn't cover the WWF. He didn't cover other territories. He might have a paragraph where he would make mention, so-and-so that used to be here in this area is now wrestling in such and such territory. People that it had to have some kind of slant or connection to Louisville and its environs, because that's what the service that Norman was providing for his pen pals was, these are the matches that I see in my area. I'm telling you about them, and I want you to do the same for me and yours. And the reason why that he didn't even usually rate something if we saw it on tape or on television, unless the MSG shows, because that was a thing at the time where that Madison Square Garden cable system, now the fans discovered if you got cable, the few who could get it at that point, you could see the actual live Madison Square Garden show. And a lot of people still didn't have the cable availability to get that. So he was covering that like an event that he went to, but otherwise it would be what he saw live. And even if he'd get like results from Evansville for me, he would put the results in, but he wouldn't give them star ratings because he didn't see it.
Now, if I could say one more thing, and this is probably for a bigger discussion at a later time, and I'm fascinated by everything around this period of time, but Terry Justice started doing his newsletters or bulletins in 1978.
Right.
Shortly after he got going, a few months later, Norm Dooley appears as a correspondent in one of them, starts doing a report. In there, it was a different report. It was what he was seeing on TV, and also whatever he saw at the actual show in Louisville. By the time he did Weasel's World, it had kind of moved away from the TV reviews.
Yes, because he was seeing more. See, here's the thing. Norman didn't drive. Norman was either the same age as me or a year younger, I think, but close, right? And I don't believe that he had been going to the matches as early as I had, like 74, 75, 76 in Louisville. And he didn't drive, and I don't remember why at this point after 40-something years. He seemed like his eyesight was an issue. I mean, he could see to write and see to watch wrestling, but that may be something. But he was like me before I got my driver's license, where his mom had to drive him to the events. So I think he started going live to Louisville later on to the live matches. He started watching on TV, but then not only was he able to convince his mother to take him to St. Louis and every once in a while to Indianapolis, but then I started taking him on the loops that I was going to Memphis or, wherever in this territory. And we started going to Cincinnati together when Crockett opened up Cincinnati to just be fans and enjoy the matches, where I didn't have to worry about doing photography. And, but then, of course, then we couldn't get as good a seats because I didn't have an in. But that was the thing is Norman, slowly got into this. But then we were talking about, you and I couldn't remember exactly how Norman and I met. I know we met at the Louisville Gardens at the matches, first time in person, face to face. But I believe upon retrospect and trying to think about it, that it was seeing his name from New Albany, Indiana in one of the Terry Justice bulletins that made me realize, wait a minute, there's another one here in town. And sometime between the end of 1979 and the summer of 1980, we have pieced together, that's when either I may have dropped Norman a line or some way or another, we got together at the matches and discovered that we had the common love. And, that's when, and as a matter of fact, I had just gotten my first VCR, and I think Norman followed a few months after that. But then the deal was with me and 3 or 4 other friends that liked wrestling. When we got the VCR, we found out we needed 2, because now you can tape shit for yourself, but you can't trade shit with anybody else unless you've got 2. And we didn't want to give up our original Memphis tapes or our original Japanese tapes. So I sold Norman my first Magnavox VCR sometime in late 1980 when I got one of the new models that had 6-hour speed. And then he got it, and we ended up, each of us having at least 2 VCRs so that we could make videotapes. And whereas I was the completionist and wanted everything and kept everything, Norman didn't want to spend that money. He didn't want to have that storage space, and he would watch shit, copy over onto another tape what he really liked, and then send the next one on or reuse it or whatever the case. But it ended up that over the years, especially when I got in the business and left Louisville, Norman became the guy that continued to tape the Memphis TV for me. And through the rest of the 80s, he sent me all the tapes that he compiled. The AWA tape was all interviews because the matches sucked, but he took the best of all the various territory TVs and sent them to me. And not only that, but actually cataloged, because he had so much time on his hands when I was on the road, he cataloged the existing tape collection I had. So now all the tapes I still have, most of them, the contents are listed in Norman's handwriting. So that was what we started doing at that point. And by around the summer of 1980, when we all went to the WFIA convention in Atlanta, that's when we all gave each other nicknames. And Norman, because of his thick glasses, his light blonde hair, and his resemblance to a skinny John Denver, became Weasel Dooley. I was Killer Cornette. Walt Wolanski was Wolf Wolanski. Pete Lederberg had a name, whatever the fuck. And Weasel started at the top of his sheet, started putting Weasel's World of Wrestling. Because this was teenage guys doing this shit, because we liked wrestling and just fucking around. We had no delusions we were actually going to be part of the business. That's why mine came out of nowhere. But it was just shit that 18, 19-year-old guys were doing at that time that liked wrestling. And
what did he want to do, or what did he do? Like, recently I read the last issue of Terry Justice's bulletin that his brother put out after he passed away. And in it, it reveals that he was a bank teller. And I was like, that's really interesting, especially when you consider how many of these he was printing out a week. What about Dooley? What was his occupation, or what was he looking to do?
I don't know. here's the thing. I'm sorry, but when you were 18-year-old wrestling fan in the 70s, you didn't sit around going, well, what would you like to do with your life? You sat around going, God damn it, why can't they bring Terry Funk back in again? Weasel didn't have a job, and I don't know that he ever tried to get one. And he wasn't a lazy person. Now that you asked that question, I don't know, because I mean, it wasn't like I was looking for I was the photographer at the matches at the Louisville Gardens. I was making more money than I would have, some 19-year-old jack-off kid would have made doing anything else.
You were making more than most of the wrestlers.
Some of the wrestlers now especially. But and see, Norman's mother was an older lady. She was a very nice lady, but she was probably, I think one time we worked out in her early 40s when she had Norman, because she was humming around 60 at the time that I met him. And I mean, she'd be 100 years old today if she was still alive. And I hope she is, but I have no idea. And I don't know that she had a job. I'm pretty sure that maybe there was, she is already set up in some respect. They didn't live in a multi-million-dollar home. I'm not saying they were rich, but either disability or it had inherited something or whatever the case from Norman's father, who was deceased at that point. But no, that's pretty much it. I mean, he had gone to school. He was an intelligent guy, but he didn't have a job, didn't really need a job, didn't drive a car, but, invented the wrestling newsletter system we know today.
Even when you look at these, if you remember what the Observer looked like when Dave first started it up and it was legal size, and then even eventually when it became a regular size newsletter, other than issues with the, I think it was the Flying O, the same look. I mean, the typewriter look, it's the same exact look as the early Observer. It's kind of crazy how much Dave was clearly influenced by this.
Well, and one more thing, the whole rating system deal, and I know you and a lot of other people that have just run roughshod with this thing will be, now we found the real first 5-star match, we think, that I'd forgotten about because it came a week before Funk and Lawler, and that blew everything out of the water. And we found some other things that were written at the time that we've forgotten about. But the star rating system, and we've told the story, but just to make sure everybody's clear, it was as simple as this. I'm talking to Weasel Dooley on the phone one night while I'm reading the TV guide, which everybody back in 1980 kept next to the television because elsewise you wouldn't know what was on TV. And I said, Weasel, as much detail and as much criticism as you go into on these matches, you ought to start rating them like they rate the movies in the TV guide. And he thought that was a great idea. And that's what he started doing. And it was just, like I said, it was just for his 30 or 40 or 50 pen pals. And it was just for us to be tickled by. And we never had any idea that anybody would actually take this seriously, or more importantly, that there would ever be a day that would come that any wrestlers would give 2 flying shits and a fucking honk what fans rated their matches in terms of stars like the movies and TV guide. And then when everybody talks about, it's broken the scale, well, we broke our own scale because it was just a jack-off thing that 2 teenage guys were doing. So we'd already broken it about 6 months after we started it. It was just, again, we're going to see this and that's great, but we're going to see that and that's even better. And then we've talked about giving 6 stars to the Louisville Gardens 8-man brawl that set everything ablaze with those 8-man tags in 1981. And then, one of the matches after that got 6.5 stars, blah, blah, blah. But no, actually, and I'll say this and I'll quit. Again, the star rating system was supposed to be 1 star. That shit sucked. 2 stars, that was about what we expected. 3 stars, that was a really good match. 4 stars, they tore the house down. And 5 stars every once in a while if Terry Funk or some other world-class talent is involved and they hit on all cylinders. And dud for when the people's feelings were hurt by what they watched. It was like the movies, except we added 5 stars. And then everybody went insane when Uncle Dave started doing it. And then the modern fan base came along and thought that was something that had always been done and had some importance somehow to somebody. And here we go.
Well, 2 questions for you. And one, as you just said, and this is kind of big, we're going to reveal what we now believe is the true first 5-star match, as well as several other ones that seemingly no one has, as these sheets disappeared, no one realized there were other 5-star matches out there. But the question I have for you is, in your eyes, the matches, even though this is just 2 kids jerking off, like you said, the matches that are 4 stars before the 5-star match. So that wouldn't mean it's the best I've ever seen. It just means it's as good as I could expect. What would you say?
No, a 4-star match would be like a 4-star movie. This is something you'd want to see again. They tore the house down. This was a great match. This was, if you had it on video, you'd watch it again. Or, it's Gone with the Wind or, Citizen Kane of wrestling. It's as good as it can get in that respect.
For instance, I have one here, Billy Robinson versus Tony Charles, 4 stars.
Yeah.
And that makes sense. I've seen tapes of the one from Memphis, not the one from Louisville, obviously.
Well, and then also, but you go in here in these further and you see another Billy Robinson, Tony Charles match, and he gave it 2 stars. And he mentioned that, wow, as great as the matches between these guys have been before, I was really looking forward to this, but it wasn't much. And that was because of probably the context, the situation. Maybe one of the guys had an injury, or maybe they had just realized that now they're just on the card and they're not figured in. Because when Billy Robinson first came in and Jarrett put the CWA world title on him, Jarrett was telling Robinson, because that was Lawler's world title when Lawler broke his leg, I need a guy that can carry a world championship that people will view as a wrestling world champion and get this belt over. And Robinson at first took that to heart. And one of the great matches that he could have is with Tony Charles, because they did the World of Sport stuff, and they did the mat wrestling, and they did the chain wrestling, and they did all the spots that you see especially the British influenced guys of today try to do, but it looks like they're paying homage to Robinson and Charles. It doesn't look like 2 salty old real shooter fucks snatching this shit and making it look real. It looks like an exhibition, but that's where it all came from. So under those circumstances, Billy Robinson, Tony Charles was a 4-star match, and wow, and they could light the place up. But when they weren't motivated and when they weren't being focused on, and when people were there to see other shit that interested them, both the match may not be as good and the participants may not put as much into it.
Now, let me ask you this, because again, I want to try to make this so that any modern fans, younger fans can kind of understand. Because you can go out there, and I think it's on YouTube probably, Tony Charles versus Billy Robinson from Memphis, which is a different match than the one I'm talking about, but it's still really good. When you give it 4 stars, like you weren't looking at it in a vacuum, like, oh, they had a great match, it just so happened that the fans were there. The fans were reacting to everything. I think that's one of the big differences.
That's one of the most important parts. If the people were sitting there like, okay, the work may be good, the drop kick may be good, but nobody's really excited, and that's the biggest part of it. So, yes, all of the matches that got 4 stars, in one respect or another, had people jumping up and down, screaming, throwing babies in the air. It's just how they got there, whether it's scientific wrestling, brawling, blood, whatever the fuck, that's the point. If the fans don't give a shit, you didn't have a great match.
And one last question before we get to all this about Weasel's World of Wrestling in and of itself, the sheet. He was traveling with you. He was your friend. Was it so inside you didn't worry at all about the idea that someone in the office would find out and get mad at you?
Well, because first of all, it wasn't me. It wasn't me. It was Owen. I wasn't even there. No, I was a little bit farther ahead of Weasel in terms of being smart to terminology and etc. Just because I'd been around the business. And also, I don't think Weasel had ever, maybe he wasn't a fan at that point. He'd never read Whatever Happened to Gorgeous George? Because Babyface and Heel are in that book. But Weasel's early newsletters still referred to good guys and bad guys, dirty wrestler or scientific wrestler. And even I've mentioned this, I'd never heard the term high spot until my first day on Memphis television. And we didn't know at the time that there was a booker. We thought that Jarrett, who in our minds was the god of wrestling, was calling all the finishes. We knew there was somebody telling these people what to do and how to do it, but we didn't know there was a booker. We thought the promoter did that. So Jarrett, who also served often as the booker, we were right sometimes, but we didn't know that sometimes it was Dundee or sometimes it was Robert Fuller. These things are as we're starting to gather all that stuff. To the question you asked, he was already doing it before I knew him. And he was doing it independently of me, and I didn't bother to tell anybody that, I had the idea for him to rate 4 stars. Nobody in the Memphis wrestling office ever saw any of Weasel's sheets because he sent them in the mail to other fans in different parts of the country. He didn't advertise it. He didn't sell it. He didn't want subscribers. It was a pen pal thing. And sometimes, I tried to, if I knew something that he didn't, give him a little more of an understanding about it. But at the same time, neither one of us were smart and affluent and fluent in, carny or inside wrestling lingo. So, no, if I'd have been doing this, I'd have got some heat. But just because I'm bringing a friend of mine from New Albany along to the matches in Memphis, nobody gave it a second fucking thought. And by the way, if anybody has any of these wonderful pieces of history from Norman Dooley, Weasel's World of Wrestling, legal page sheets, Xeroxed, we would love them. Contact me and Brian because we are trying to put this collection back together. And it's so weird that everybody who knew Norman, who had these things, can't find them and can't find him. That is one of the most bizarre aspects of this whole story is, and I mentioned to you, a lot of people are saying, well, Jim, how'd you lose track of him? At the end of the 80s, there was no more territories, so there was no more territory wrestling shows for him to send me on tape, right? But obviously, he came to Dallas to my first wedding in 87. We were still friends, and when he was still, cataloging some of my videotapes. And then when I moved from Charlotte to Knoxville or to East Tennessee and started Smoky Mountain Wrestling, I lost track of everybody because I was constantly inundated with shit and I wasn't on the phone with anybody unless it was business. And for that 3 or 4 year period, unless you came to me, I didn't talk to a lot of people. And during that period of time, like I said, Norman didn't drive, and I think he had slowed down on going to matches at that point because most of us were not interested in wrestling anymore. And then when I came back in 95, I think the last time that I saw him in person was I came back to Louisville in 1995 for one of the 25th anniversary Gardens event they did. And I remember I saw him there and we talked for a little while. And I'm sure that I said, call me. And then shortly after that, we closed down and I moved to Connecticut. And for 3 more years, I was, quarantined up there. And when I came home to Louisville, I knew I'd see Norman at OVW and we never did. And I don't know anybody that's seen him in 20 years. So if anybody knows where the elusive, mysterious Norman Dooley is or has any more of these sheets, we would love to talk to him or them or you or whatever. Did I say that right, Brian?
I think so. And what about him? What if he hears this?
Norman, where are you? What did Dutch Mantell say one time? You know what I'd say to my grandfather if he was here right now? I'd say, Granddad, what are you doing here? You've been dead for 15 years. Norman, where you been all of our lives? We love you, and he's got to be 60 years old like me by now. Holy shit. Anyway, there's a few of these that start out in 1979, and I wish I had one from a couple of weeks beforehand. This was the Jerry Lawler and Ken Lucas program that they did at the Gardens in December of 79 and January of 1980, and it started off with one of the wildest, bloodiest matches I've ever seen. And over the course of 3 or 4 weeks, they had fans hitting the ring to jump Jimmy Hart, and that's where the cop almost pulled a gun on Jerry Jarrett when he was dumping another mark out of the ring and thought that Jarrett was a fan hitting the ring. And these were fucking crazy matches. And he did no star ratings yet, and I don't have the sheet on the original match. But nevertheless, here's an interesting one. You might not have this one, because I had a couple more from Frank the Collector. But January 24th, 1980, Carrollton, Kentucky National Guard Armory. An outlaw show. An independent show before there were such things. Somebody, I think it was probably Dale Mann. Big Dale Mann, who used to promote little independent shows here when there were no independents. He'd promote them over near Lexington and various places around the area. Got talent from Bruiser in Indianapolis and ran a spot show in Carrollton, Kentucky at the Armory. And Norman actually went to it. And the main event was Jerry Valiant and Tiny Hampton subbing for Paul Christie, beating Bobo Brazil and Spike Huber. And that was an example. That was probably, I would say one of the earliest outlaw shows of any kind that Norman would have gone to, or that they just didn't have them around here. Independent wrestling, outlaw wrestling was not a thing most of the places where there was a full-time territory. But then... And
shortly after that, you would get ICW.
Yes, and he's got some great reports here. Some people remember ICW's crowds a little more fondly than they actually happened. But here's the thing I was going to say. He goes to Carrollton, Kentucky at the National Guard Armory to see 4 matches with Bruiser's Over the Hill Gang, and the next day he's in St. Louis at the Kiel Auditorium, and a sellout of 11,053 people were there to see Kevin Von Erich beat Jack Briscoe for the Missouri State title, and Bruiser Brody and Dick Murdoch beat Andre the Giant and Dick the Bruiser, along with a battle royal and et cetera, et cetera. Norman loved St. Louis wrestling. My thing was the bloom was off the rose in St. Louis by that point, where it wasn't like the 70s where up and down the card, everybody was a major NWA superstar. So he always wanted me to go to St. Louis with him sometime. The thing is, I didn't have an inn over there. I couldn't get ringside, couldn't take pictures. Maybe if I'd asked the magazine, Bill Apter, Norm Kites or whatever, that blah, blah, blah. But I could make money and enjoy myself by going, if I was going to travel, going to the matches in Memphis or going somewhere else in this territory. I made, arrangements for Cincinnati because that was to see Piper and Snuka and et cetera. But at this time, St. Louis, the main events, 2 or 3 main events were huge names. And then the underneath was the Kansas City crowd. And it was feast or famine. The first 3 or 4 matches in St. Louis just stunk, and then the main events were great because that's where the talent was.
I have a question for you about St. Louis and Weasel Dooley. And it's funny to bring up because I mentioned Terry Justice earlier. At a certain point after the 1979 WFIA convention, he announced he has 2 new photographers in-house. You'll be handling the color photos, and Roger Deem in St. Louis would be handling the black and white photos. Any memories of Roger Dean? But the other question was, when you brought up St. Louis, how big a fan of Ted DiBiase was Weasel Dooley?
Oh, my God. And see, that's the thing. Weasel was mad when Flair won the NWA title the first time because he thought it should have gone to DiBiase. Because Weasel loved it. And DiBiase was, at the time, the story going around was that there were 3 people in consideration for the belt, Flair, DiBiase, and somebody else. Who was it?
Dusty.
And Norman was pulling for DiBiase, but a lot of people were because he was fucking good at that point. And he would have made a classic style NWA champion, but things were changing and they wanted somebody with more personality. So they went with Flair. But on this sheet, after the January 25th, 1980 St. Louis Kiel Auditorium show, because Weasel stayed at the Warwick Hotel so he could meet the wrestlers. And he mentions, I had the pleasure of seeing top correspondent and friend Terry Justice once again.
Huh.
And also to meet Eddie Gilbert for the first time. And that's how Terry Justice got involved in doing bulletins, because he met Eddie the year before Eddie started wrestling, and he wanted to do the Tommy and Eddie Gilbert fan club. And, well, in one of the others, you mentioned Roger Deem. Roger Deem was the photographer in St. Louis, and Norman met him. He was a heavy-set fellow, but I was jealous of him because he took great pictures. And my black and white action work was still in its formative stages. And I did a lot of color stuff because that's what they sold at the merchandise stands, whereas Roger was shooting more for the magazines, did black and white. But yeah, so we got to be the official photographers of the club. And then, hold on, I was going to flip through this one. He's got another sheet here about March 7th at St. Louis. He never mentioned or never missed St. Louis when he got a chance.
How far is that drive?
275 miles. So just 4.5 hours down the interstate. But he says, it goes without saying, the highlight of my trip was seeing Ric Flair at the hotel. He had a cab waiting outside, but he took time to sign autographs for quite a few fans and posed for photos. After the card, I waited at the Warwick for the wrestlers to return. Bulldog Bob Brown got the worst response by the fans at the hotel. Many of them began barking at him. They all knew Bob Brown. He'd been in the territory for 20 years, and he didn't belong on those cards, but he was in the office. So the smart fans in St. Louis gave him all kinds of shit. Anyway, I was going to this one next because this was June 12th in Cincinnati, June 12th, 1980. And I'm not sure, but I'm surprised that Norman was there because hardly anybody else was. My mom and I went up because I went to take pictures. My mom went to help with the gimmick table. And Christine Jarrett and her niece Donna were there because this was the debut of Jerry Jarrett's territory in Cincinnati at the Gardens. And I think this was one of two shows they actually ended up running. In spring of 1980, Jarrett had gotten TV in Cincinnati after many, many years of effort. And remember, we've told the story, he couldn't get on Channel 5 because the program director there had the tape of the Sheik with the snake and cutting the job guy's head with the razor blade and said, fuck that.
And Buddy Fuller gave it to the station manager thinking it would sell him on wrestling.
Yes. But he got TV in Cincinnati and ran this debut card, and it was the absolute worst time because summertime in the Tennessee territory was big, but not in Ohio. They were wired differently. Plus, the town had been dark, dead for several years after the Sheik. Plus, this was the time where Lawler was out with a broken leg. So Jerry Jarrett tried to open up what would be the biggest or second biggest city in his territory behind Memphis, Cincinnati, Ohio, with 5 matches and no Jerry Lawler. And the attendance was between 400 and 500 people in the Cincinnati Gardens. It seated about 11,000. Robert Gibson beat Ken Wayne. Carl Fergie beat the Superstar, who was Jerry Novak, the bounty hunter. Jimmy Valiant and Ken Lucas beat Skull Murphy and Gypsy Joe. Paul Ellering was disqualified and retained the AWA Southern Heavyweight title over Sonny King in 15 minutes and 46 seconds. And in the main event, Bill Dundee and Ricky Morton beat Wayne Ferris and Larry Latham with their manager, Sergeant Danny Davis. And that was that. And Norman was there, and I didn't know it because I don't think I knew him then because he did not ride with us. So I have narrowed down somehow when I met Norman as somewhere between June and August of 1980 because he went to the WFIA convention in Atlanta with me. That I saw this just last night. He was in Cincinnati, but he didn't go with us, and I didn't know he was there.
Now, you could have been corresponding with him before you met him, right?
Well, then we would have met because we lived 30 miles apart from each other. And he went to the Louisville Gardens every week.
What puzzles me is we would be going on almost a year and a half of both your names appearing in various bulletins together with your town, so I would think you would have connected before this point.
Well, maybe I did then. But he didn't ride with us. Maybe his mother took him. But somewhere in the first fucking part of 1980, I've narrowed it down. Anyway, so that was the debut in Cincinnati of Jerry Jarrett's, and I think they ran one more show that we didn't go to and then folded it up. And by the end of the year, Crockett had gotten, and see, the people in Ohio didn't know any of those names, and many of them were not worth knowing. But by the end of the year, Crockett got TV up there in Cincinnati on Channel 5, strongest station, and was drawing 6,000, 7,000, 8,000 people within 6 months. I got another one. Hold on here. I'm flipping through. There we go. The first Weasel's World of Wrestling titled as such that I can find is in 1981 with results from January. And they give the card for the February event in Cincinnati, which was Paul Jones and Superstar against Snuka and Stevens for the NWA World Tag title. Ivan Koloff against Sweet Ebony Diamond, who was Rocky Johnson. Dewey Robertson versus Swede Hansen, Frankie Lane, Jim Lancaster. And Weasel would give his predictions. He predicted Superstar to pin Stevens, Koloff to pin Diamond, Robertson to beat Hansen. And he said also on the card is Jackie Ruffin, who will probably wrestle Whistler's mother in order to be able to win a match. And then a weekend that I remember he was with me, you know the time that they brought Hulk Hogan in to Memphis to wrestle Lawler, right? When
Sure.
Hogan had become Hulk Hogan.
81, yeah.
February 9th, 1981.
First time Jimmy Hart managed him, right?
Yep. Listen to this. We had a week. On February 5th, we were in Winslow, Indiana at the high school gym. On February 6th, we were in Junction City, Kentucky. And then I remember Weasel went with me. February 7th, we went to Jonesboro, Arkansas. February 8th, that was a Sunday, we were in Jackson, Tennessee. And then February 9th at the Mid-South Coliseum. And Lawler versus Hogan. Here is the contemporaneous report. Lawler came to the ring with the theme from Rocky II being played on the PA system. And I know because we went to Pop Tunes in Memphis that afternoon after I shot on-location pictures of Lawler and picked out the Rocky II soundtrack and listened to it to see if it was good entrance music. So anyway, February 9th, Hector Guerrero beat Gypsy Joe 2.5 stars. Eddie Gilbert and Eddie Hogan beat the Angel and Ali Hassan on DQ 3 stars. Sonny King, Eddie Gilbert, Eddie Hogan, and Hector Guerrero beat Ali Hassan, the Dream Machine, Gypsy Joe, and the Angel in an 8-man elimination tag match, 3 stars. Jimmy Valiant beat Tony Charles, 3 stars. Southern Tag Title and Jimmy Kent's Hair versus Tommy Rich's Hair and Dundee Leaving Town Forever. Dundee and Rich won over the Bounty Hunters. No stars.
You sound like Lance there. No star.
Well, he left him off. He didn't say. And then Jerry the King Lawler versus Hulk Hogan. Lawler came to the ring with the theme from Rocky II being played on the PA system. The King was wearing white tights, a white crown, and riding a white horse led by 2 costumed squires. This type of entrance is not unusual for Lawler. A few weeks ago, he was dropped from the ceiling of the Mid-South Coliseum while the theme from Superman was being played. Actually, he was on a rope. They didn't drop him. They lowered him. Lawler body slammed Hogan twice, which was quite the feat. After the body slam, Lawler dropped the strap, which is his trademark. Hogan got down on his knees and begged the King not to hit him. The crowd went totally bonkers, which they did. Hogan threw Lawler into the referee, knocking the official down. Lawler had Hogan covered for the pin, but the ref was still down on the mat. Jimmy Hart jumped in the ring and broke the cane over Jerry's back. The referee got up and disqualified Hogan for outside interference. Lawler got part of the cane and used it on Hogan before he and Hart ran back to the dressing room. 4-star match because people went crazy. Attendance 9,007.
So again, 4-star match before the first 5-star match. You definitely want to watch it again. Great match.
And again, now people would be like, 4 stars? How could this be 4 stars? It's Hulk Hogan, and nobody broke a table. It's because in a town they ran every week, 9,000 people showed up to see it and went crazy when they did it. And it was exactly what it was supposed to be.
You went past the previous one of Weasel's World. He's reviewing the Indianapolis card on February 28th. He talks about the upcoming lineup with Don Kent versus Dominic DeNucci. Help, help, help. The bum is back.
Oh, yeah.
Not a fan of Dominic DeNucci in the ring, I'm imagining.
Well, because he was... the thing is with Bruiser's company at that point, everybody was either a local job guy or in their 50s. And it was just brutal. It was horrible. Here's a correction. Weasel was wrong. Apparently a change has been made in a Bruiser's match with Bruiser Brody, but also substituting for Brody on the Indy card on the 28th will be Ox Baker. That's about like replacing Cheryl Ladd with Phyllis Diller. So you see now where Meltzer got some of his smartassery. We're going to flip through a couple. Here is what you were talking about. Go ahead.
And that's just interesting, too, and just in terms of fandom and how people are writing. You know, the idea that he knows. Yeah, with Bruiser Brody, I'm going to get excitement. With Ox Baker, you know, whatever fans are supposed to excite with that announcement, obviously he's not one of them, and so many of us wouldn't have been as a replacement for Bruiser Brody.
Well, and see, here's the thing. This was 1981. Ox Baker in Indianapolis in 1974 had a great run, and people remembered it, and he was the champion. He worked with Bruiser, and I guess 74 through 76. Ox versus Ellis, Ox versus Bruiser, the original Coward Waves the Flag match I think they had, blah, blah, blah. That worked, even though Ox was never, you know, Jack Briscoe. It worked, and what a great promo. But now it's 5, 6, 7, 8 years later, and everybody's older, and everybody's slower, and it's the same thing. And it didn't work then. It's context, it's time, and it's place, and it's also age and fitness of the competitors. But here's the thing. The next sheet, February 14th and February 16th, 1981. On February 14th, Valentine's Day, he went to the Commonwealth Convention Center in Louisville, Kentucky, to see an ICW show, the Paphos promotion. The main event, 2 main events, Bob Roop versus Randy Savage, and Pez Whatley and Ronnie Garvin against Bob Orton Jr. and Jeff Sword in a Texas death match. So then that was on February 14th.
Look at the attendance.
And I'm about to get there. The attendance for the card was 250 in Louisville, Kentucky. This is what we've been talking about when people fondly remember ICW now because Randy Savage was there, and in the early days it was Bob Orton Jr. And Rip Rogers had a great time there and learned a lot. They never drew a fucking house, not against Jarrett. They could draw when they had a town that only they were running. Some of the eastern Kentucky towns, they'd put 700-800 people in those spot shows because nobody else was running it. But when they tried to run head-to-head with Jerry Jarrett, it was a fucking nightmare. The Louisville Gardens was in those days never below, if there were less than 2,500 people in the building for the weekly show, it was because of bad weather, snow, thunderstorms, whatever. And that was still not a real good house. And a lot of times it was more like 3,000-4,000. The ICW shows, they did 250, 300, 350, because that was the people who were going to go see every bit of wrestling. But since Jarrett was in town every week, how much money you got, how much time you got, how many tickets you're going to buy. They couldn't get a break. But here's the thing. On February 14th, he saw the ICW event live. On February 16th, me and Norman both watched the Madison Square Garden show on MSG Cable at his house. And let's compare some things. Because this is the same guy looking at wrestling. It's just two different kinds of wrestling. In February 14th in Louisville, the Bob Roop versus Randy Savage match got 3.5 stars from Weasel. And the Texas Death Tag match got 4 stars because they did all kinds of bullshit and crazy stuff and boom, boom, boom. And he was into it. And Savage was involved, did a run-in.
Mentions that Savage's music at the time was Hot Stuff.
Yeah. Oh, that's what he played. Hot Stuff. I want some hot stuff, babe. Donna Summer. This was before Eddie Gilbert became Hot Stuff. This was, that was Savage's ICW music. But anyway, 2 nights later, Moondogs and Lou Albano versus Tony Gurria, Pat Patterson, and Rick Martel, 2 stars. Killer Khan versus Dom DiNucci, 1 star. Stan Hansen versus Bob Backlund. Listen to this. Backlund has got to be the biggest joke in all of wrestling. Backlund and Hansen were both bloody during the match, although I hesitate to call what Howdy Doody, that was Bob Backlund's nickname with the smart fans, Howdy Doody had on his face as blood. It was shown on TV where Backlund stuck his head under the ring for 3 days. Coincidentally, when he got back up, he had blood all over his face. Just when the match was starting to get exciting, the referee stopped the match because of excessive bleeding. If they did that at Jarrett's Cards in Louisville, the fans would lynch the referee. Jim Cornette said he's bled more from a popped pimple. By the end of the match, Howdy had all the blood wiped off of his face. I really feel sorry for the WWF fans. I can barely stand to watch Backlund once a month. They have to watch him all the time. Hansen gets 4 stars. Howdy only 1. And then Hulk Hogan versus Rick Mcgraw was a 2-star match. Pedro Morales versus Sergeant Slaughter got 3 stars because of Slaughter. It says Slaughter looked really good during the match, which is quite a compliment considering he had no opponent. The only nice thing I can say about Morales is he falls out of the ring good. So the point is, here you got 250 people in the Commonwealth Convention Center in Louisville, Kentucky watching an outlaw show, but the matches were better than what you saw at Madison Square Garden with 20,000 people there, because it was the difference in territories and what the people were educated to. If the live card for Madison Square Garden had just suddenly walked out in Louisville in those days and had the exact same matches they had in MSG, it would have killed the fucking town in Louisville. People would have never come back because they were rotten. And it wasn't what the people were used to. It wasn't the style or the flavor. So I think it's interesting when you see a guy, again, who didn't have any professional involvement with wrestling, was just a fan, the different way that he rated the different territory matches. And then there's one coming up I know you want to talk about.
Well, Jim, a couple other notes from these reviews here of these 2 shows that you pointed out, because it kind of goes into what we were talking about earlier, the style of writing and the snark, as you put it. From the ICW show Match 3, Limping Lanny Poffo beat Hustler Rip Rogers with a sunset flip in 1601. I hate to admit it, but Lanny does have some good wrestling moves. 3 stars. And then if you go to the MSG show, oh boy, thankfully the time isn't here. SD Jones versus Baron Cicluna.
Ooh.
Both men looked terrible. During the match, it looked like they were giving each other a massage. 1.5 star, but we don't get who won or what the time was.
Yeah.
You know what? This popped me just because it's a name that I hear Lance Russell saying, and it makes me laugh for no good reason. The Hangman versus Frank Savage. This bout was a little better than the first match, but not by much. The guillotine that the Hangman used at the end of the match looked good. The Hangman was much better when he wrestler as John Louis a few years ago.
Yeah,
now he looks awful. Obviously he meant that, but I hear Lance Russell in my head. John Louis!
John Louis! Because he worked as Hangman Neil Gway. And he was also, as you just mentioned, the Hangman in the WWF. But for some reason, when they brought, and he was French of some description, either French Canadian or French or whatever, but when they brought him down here and teamed him up with Joe LeDuc, they gave him his name. I think it was supposed to be Jean-Louis. That sounds French, right? But the way that they would print it in the newspaper ads was John, John, Louis, Louie. So all these fucking Southerners, that's old John Louis. Sounded as French as I do.
Well, Jim, before we wrap things up, and there are so many of these, and we're going to go through them.
We're going to do multiple parts on this because there's a lot of stuff in here as you go through in chronological order that has been lost to history. But you were just tickled pink about something that we found. You want to spill the beans or you want me to?
Well, I'll just say that one of the cool revelations in going through these is that while you previously revealed here on the show, I think the first ever 6-star match and the first 6.5-star match, now that I think about it, we all assumed that the very first 5-star match was Jerry Lawler versus Terry Funk.
Yes, we did.
And it turns out not only was there more than one Jerry Lawler versus Terry Funk 5-star match, but that was not even the first known 5-star match. And we have a new one for you to reveal here today.
And I was there for that one too, and I didn't even remember it. But here's the fucking deal. Is, as I mentioned, Norman and I would go to Cincinnati. And sometimes, every once in a while, we'd take somebody else, sometimes just be us. But the first times that Crockett started running Cincinnati, the shows were always on weekends. And usually my weekends were free because Louisville ran on Tuesday, Evansville, Indiana on Wednesday, Lexington, Kentucky, first Thursday of every month, or a Kentucky spot show on Thursday. I was during the middle of the week, I was doing my work, and then the weekend was free unless I went to Memphis. So we started going to Cincinnati, and then for whatever reason, they switched up and started running Cincinnati every once in a while on a Monday night. And so one particular week, we did a Cincinnati on Monday, Louisville on Tuesday, Evansville on Wednesday. It was hectic. And that was about a week and a half before the very first Jerry Lawler, Terry Funk match in Memphis, March 23rd, 1981, that we have talked about, was so fucking crazy. And then Weasel, who did not go with me to the March 23rd match that I thought that he had, instead, according to his sheets, it was a couple of weeks later, on April 6th, that Weasel went with me to Memphis when Lawler and Plowboy Frazier wrestled both of the Funks, Terry and Dory. So all of these were being conflated in my 40-year-old memories, but it comes down to this. On March 9th in Cincinnati, Ohio at the Gardens, it was probably the best card that Crockett ever put there. And there were several main events that were incredible, including, you remember from seeing the videotape, Blackjack Mulligan in the Carolinas and the Iron Sheik, when he could still go, had a heck of a fucking program and a long-running series of matches, right?
Right.
And we got to see Blackjack Mulligan against the Iron Sheik. This was, hold on, I'm trying to read. Weasel didn't do paragraphs well. Mulligan pinned the Iron Sheik with a flying crossbody off the top rope. 9 minutes, 33 seconds, got 4 stars because, again, this was one of the wild ones, double juice, people are going crazy. Then they followed it up with a completely different style of match, Ricky Steamboat and Jimmy Snuka, 2 athletes like that. And the Snuka at the time was the most impressive physical specimen we were seeing. When he was a heel in the Carolinas in the early 80s and still in shape, it was amazing. That one, not only did Steamboat beat Snuka, but then they had a big brawl after it was over. That got 4.5 stars. And then for the United States heavyweight title, Rowdy Roddy Piper versus Nature Boy Ric Flair. And Flair got in the ring, and I remember this. Minutes passed before Piper came out. And then he came out doing his whole thing, the bagpipes, blah, blah, blah. Flair stopped him, got into it, and they had a heck of a fucking match. Tommy Young was the referee. I'd never even met Tommy at that point, but these are the first times I'd seen him in person. And basically, Flair and Piper tore the house down for 20 minutes, and Flair won on disqualification. Piper kept the United States title, and Weasel described it as, "This was the best match that I have seen in quite some time. 5 stars." So he didn't even say we're breaking the scale for this one, so I'm wondering if he did it before, because like I said, since it meant so little to us as a thing in relation to everything else, what we were seeing, the results of the match, etc., is just something we did. He may have done it before, but this is definitely before Flair and Funk on March 23rd. And hold on, I got to flip a couple pages, because what he wrote on the March 23rd match, because he didn't go with me on that one, I thought he had. Jerry Lawler beat Terry Funk. Both wrestlers were extremely bloody during this match, which lasted more than 15 minutes, and plus this was shown on television the week after. Obviously, disqualification, Funk was not able, or not disqualification, but Funk was not able to get back in the ring and was counted out. I was told that on a scale, and I would have been the one to tell him, on a scale of 1 to 5, that this match was an 8. So.
Wait a minute. This is news. The first 8-star match was Lawler versus Funk?
But it wasn't legitimate because I was the only one that felt that way, and Weasel was not there to examine it further. But that was the thing, is that I remembered Lawler and Funk being so far above it, just the display of violence and insanity by Terry Funk that night. The people, I've seen a lot of wrestling crowds excited. I've never seen them shocked like they were, making shocked noises. And when you go back and look at the tape, and the women in the front row crawling backwards over the backs of their chairs to get away from Lawler swinging the chair at Funk, and just all the chaos. But it was a couple of weeks later, as I mentioned, on April 6th, that Weasel went back down to Memphis with me. We stopped in Jackson at the Coliseum, then did the 6th, the Monday night. And that was the Funks against Lawler and Frazier. And now I had gone down a week or two beforehand and seen Jerry Lawler and Jack Briscoe against Dory and Terry Funk. And that was a good match, but it wasn't as good as Jerry Lawler and Plowboy Frazier against Terry and Dory Funk. And people are saying, what's wrong with this fucking picture? There's no way that Plowboy Frazier was in any way as good of a talent as Jack Briscoe. The difference was that Briscoe and Dory wanted to wrestle and do their shit. And Jack Briscoe wasn't over in Memphis. The only time that Briscoe had ever appeared in Memphis was to lose to Jerry Lawler and to defend the title against Ron Fuller, 6 years previously. So with Dory and Jack trying to wrestle, the blood feud that Lawler and Terry had started was not on display in that match, and that's what people wanted to see. They wanted to see the violence of Lawler and Terry Funk. So they come back in a Texas death match. Falls don't count. Jimmy Hart suspended above the ring, so he can't interfere. And then this match was goddamn chaos. And I'll read Weasel's description of it, and then we'll fold this up. Because when they were lifting Jimmy Hart up over the ring, he wasn't even in a cage. He was in a sling like I've had to do, and they just raised him up so he's dangling by the rope. So Weasel starts, when Hart was being lifted up, Terry grabbed him and held on. They started swinging back and forth until Funk finally let go and fell down to the floor. Terry Funk was absolutely unbelievable. I was sitting at the announcer's table for the matches. We put him with Lance because we didn't have a ticket for him. Well, Terry came walking around the ring before the match started and grabbed the table I was sitting at. Funk turned it upside down and broke off one of the legs with one swift kick. First fall, Dory pinned Lawler after the Funks double-teamed him, 7 minutes, 10 seconds. Second fall, Dory pinned Lawler again, 56 seconds. Third fall, Frazier pinned Dory after a leg drop, 5:17. Fourth fall, Plowboy pinned Dory with another leg drop, 15 seconds. Fifth fall, Frazier pinned Terry, 2:11. Sixth fall, Terry pinned Plowboy after hitting him below the belt, 1:13. During the seventh fall, Jimmy Hart took off the football helmet he was wearing and threw it down to Dory, who hit Lawler on the head with it. Terry was already on the mat. Lawler joined him after the helmet incident. Referee Jerry Calhoun counted to 10, and neither man got up, so the seventh fall was a draw. After the 30-second rest period, both Lawler and Terry were still on the mat and unable to get up by the count of 10. The referee said the first man to his feet would mean his team would win the match. Lawler got up first, so he and Frazier were declared the winners. The match itself was great, and based on my rating system, would deserve 6 stars. Dory was fairly good, Lawler was very good, Frazier was actually all right, and mere words cannot do justice to Terry Funk. He was great. The guy is a lunatic, but that's one of the main reasons I like him so much. There was so much mayhem in this bout that it would take forever to list it here. It was a truly unbelievable match. So you can remove one guy. You can trade Jack Briscoe for Plowboy Frazier and change the entire demeanor of the whole thing in a positive manner if it's done right. And the same guy that's watching Ric Flair and Roddy Piper in front of 8,000 people at the Cincinnati Gardens says that Lawler and Frazier against the Funk Brothers 2 weeks later was actually better than that.
You know, to go back to what we were talking about earlier and the influence over Dave Meltzer and the Future Observer, when we look at the sheet with the first 5-star match that we know of, Flair versus Piper, that's crazy. That's now the first known 5-star match, Flair versus Piper. Here are some news and notes at the bottom here. Rick Morton is now wrestling in Oklahoma. Considering the talent there, Rick should be in the main events. Tommy Gilbert is now in Puerto Rico. He won't be missed. Don Morocco was at the last WWF TV tapings. Baron Von Raschke has been making appearances in the AWA as a good guy. The Good Baron is scheduled to wrestle Crusher Blackwell in St. Paul on March 22nd. Hector Guerrero and Eddie Hogan have apparently left the area. Guerrero was bearable, but Hogan was terrible.
And by the way, that's Brutus Beefcake in another life.
Right. Billy Robinson has been appearing in Mexico. Tony Charles has also left the area. Ted DiBiase may be going to Florida. George's loss. Bill Dundee and Tommy Rich won the CWA World Tag Team titles from Dutch Mantell and Austin Idol in Lexington, Kentucky on March 12th. The Dream Machine is split with Jimmy Hart, is now teaming with Bill Dundee, and the Mid-Atlantic promotion has now moved into Detroit, Michigan. A card was held there on March 7th. So in terms of the tone, in terms of some of the snark, the star ratings, clearly very influential.
Well, and here's one more thing, because after the Memphis match, Lawler and Frazier Funks, we had to drive all the way back 400 miles overnight. The next day was the Louisville matches. And Louisville was always a week behind Memphis on the TV and on the cards. And some cases we didn't get what Memphis got at all. But in this case, the main event in Louisville on April 7th was Lawler versus Funk for the Southern title. No time limit, no disqualification. That we've already seen in Louisville the first match between them. This is bringing it back. And here's the description. After coming out to the ring, Funk tried to attack the announcer. Nobody's safe when Terry Funk is around. That would have been Bob Moody at that point, too, I believe, and he probably would have shit himself, as I recall. Terry once again tore up the announcer's table. He used part of it on Lawler. When he hit Jerry on the head with it, he almost knocked him out. Someone seated next to me started yelling that she wanted Lawler. Funk heard her and promptly threw Jerry out of the ring in front of her, looked at her and yelled, "There he is!" Most of the match took place outside the ring. After taking quite a bit of punishment during the match, Jerry started bombarding Terry with punches. Lawler gave Funk a tremendous fist drop off the ropes and then pinned the former NWA champion. During the pin, Jerry held Funk's trunks. After the match, Dory Jr. came out and complained about that. Terry challenged Lawler to another match. Terry said the fans, police, and the referee were all on Lawler's side. He wanted them all to leave, and then he wanted another bout with the King. The Funks finally went back to the dressing room, but not until after Terry had a number of altercations with the fans. 20-minute, 38-second time on the fall, and 5 stars for that match. And I remember that one because it was just crap. Funk was coming out every night for 30 minutes and putting on a clinic in how to take over a fucking building. And it wasn't even for money. I'm sure Terry has made more money. And I've seen a lot of Terry after that. This was the first time I'd ever gotten a chance to see Terry live on a regular basis. This is the best shit that he ever did. And was it the chemistry with him and Lawler? Was he wanted to prove something? Was somebody, he's just going to a new area and he wants to get over? But he scorched the fucking buildings during this. That's why we were all driving everywhere we could in the territory to see every match he had, because we knew it wasn't going to last and we couldn't miss this shit. And on the undercard of that match I just described, it was supposed to be Dory Funk Jr. versus Billy Robinson for the CWA title. And you think, wow, that could have something to it, right? Funk and Robinson, that's a pretty fucking interesting wrestling match. Robinson no-showed. Guess who replaced Dory Funk Jr.? Or guess who replaced Robinson against Dory Funk Jr.?
Who?
Sonny King.
Oh.
Dory Funk Jr.
There's a match I would never want to watch. Oh, my God.
Dory Funk Jr. versus Sonny King. Dory was scheduled to wrestle Billy Robinson for the CWA title, but Robinson was not there. Funk did not do much in this match with King, but in all fairness to Dory, Sonny is not a suitable opponent. Dory did pin King to win the match in 14 minutes and 17 seconds.
Oh, my God.
1.5 stars, and I'm pretty sure he was being nice to Dory Funk Jr.
Wow, 15 minutes of that. Can you imagine?
Yeah, I was there.
Oh.
I saw it, yes. And then one more thing, I'm trying to remember whether it was was it May the 5th? No, that was Blackwell. I have the one, was it the previous week in Louisville, possibly? I'll find it, but he also covered the one where Lawler and Funk had the double juice pull apart in Louisville, and the athletic commissioner got on a microphone and tried to stop him by saying, "Hey, boys, break it up." And Lawler looked down at him and said, if you think it's over, you get your ass in here and try to break it up. Here it is, May 12th, Louisville Gardens. This is when Funk came out after the empty Coliseum match, and Lawler had kicked the wooden spike into his eye. He comes out with an eye patch. And basically, he got juice, and he had a white eye patch, white eye wrapping on, and by the time the match is over, it's completely red. And they're fighting all over the place and outside the ring, and finally, Paul Morton stops it, declares it no contest. Funk gets what appears to be an ice pick from Jimmy Hart, tried to get Lawler in the eye with it. At that point, El Toro, Vinny Romeo, Jimmy Kent, Dutch Mantell, Dream Machine, Jerry Novak came out to the ring to separate Lawler and Funk. The Kentucky State Athletic Commissioner got the microphone and told him to stop, and Lawler looked at the commissioner and said, "If you think it's over, get your ass in the ring and try to stop it." Funk and Lawler were finally separated after about 10 minutes of sheer pandemonium after the time on the fall was 21:47. So they're out there for 30 minutes, bleeding, breaking shit, fucking screaming, Funk, "Pig! Suey, pig!" It was insane, and people were jumping up and down. The cops were holding them back from the rope around the ring. This was the atmosphere they created. This was 5 stars, according to Weasel Dooley.
And the first 6-star match would have been a month later.
No, that would have been a month earlier. If the tag match in Memphis with Lawler and Frazier was a month earlier.
Oh, that's right. That was sick.
Yes.
I'm thinking of the old first 6-star match.
But then see, again, because we didn't take it seriously, we weren't paying attention, but then later on it was, the big Louisville Gardens brawl. which was on May 26th. They had the big 8-man Louisville Gardens brawl. He closes up. There was so much assorted mayhem and pure pandemonium, it was impossible to keep track of it all. The brawl after the match lasted 15 minutes. The match definitely deserves the rarely bestowed rating of 6 stars for outstanding achievement in the art of Pier 6 brawling. But then again, other...
Well, one more. We have to do one more then, since we've revealed these. Jim, if you go to 8132, there's a revelation of one last 5-star match.
Hold on.
From June 18th, Lexington, Kentucky.
Oh! Randy Savage versus Ronnie Garvin on an ICW show at Lexington's Henry Clay High School. Says that Jarrett in Lexington was running Rupp Arena, 25,000-seat building. Of course, it was split down the middle, and they were drawing 7,000 or 8,000. But ICW was running in Lexington, their home base at the Henry Clay High School, and they would do, several hundred people or whatever the case. But on this particular night, it was Randy Savage versus Ronnie Garvin for the ICW title, no DQ, and Garvin's hair was up against Savage's belt. And they bumped the referee, and Savage at the time had a manager named Steve Cooper. Steve Cooper, man. Can't believe what you did to Steve Cooper, man. And he was like an old-fashioned Lawler manager like, Mickey Poole had been, where he was just a stooge for Savage. Wore a tuxedo, threw in the gimmick or distracted the referee or whatever when necessary. And basically they did a swerve where when the referee got knocked down, Steve Cooper held up a metal chair and Savage rammed Garvin into it, and Savage covered Garvin. But when the referee counted 3, Savage was declared the winner and tried to, so they tried to do the head shaving, but Garvin went crazy, hit Randy Savage in the head with Cooper's cane. It says Savage fell out of the ring, and then Garvin gave Cooper a pile driver. Garvin chased Savage to the dressing room. Ronnie came back out to the ring and cut Cooper's hair off with a pair of scissors. He also cut off Cooper's beard. Then Ronnie put an enormous amount of shaving cream on Steve's head and used a razor to shave all the hair off his head. Garvin also put some of the shaving cream in Cooper's mouth and in his pants. Ronnie then got a bucket of water and poured it over Steve's head to get rid of the shaving cream. After yelling at him and spitting on him, Garvin finally went back to the dressing room. The match itself was 8 minutes, 23 seconds, but the barbering escapade lasted 15 minutes. The bout only deserved 3.5 stars, but the incident afterwards elevated it to a 5-star rating. Because basically, they booked a hair match where neither guy was going to get their head shaved. How many times have I've even been involved in it? How many times have you heard that? It never works. But in this case, Garvin said, fuck it. They took the flunky, cut his hair off, shaved his head, shaved his eyebrows, humiliated him, and everybody had fun with it. And because of that atmosphere they created, okay, fuck it. 5 stars. Because it's meaningless anyway. Did the people enjoy it, and was it what it was supposed to be? That's the question.
You know what? I don't think we can wrap up just yet. One more sheet because it ties into everything we're talking about. So we got to tie this up, end on the right note.
Well, and hold on. I found one here. He went with me to a spot show. That was that Huntingburg show that drew. Hold on.
Huntingburg.
Huntingburg, Indiana. We did like almost 3,000 people in Huntingburg, Indiana one night for a spot show. And we even had to press Weasel in to help on the at the gimmick mat table. Okay, go ahead.
Was it 8124 that you're looking for?
Possibly 8124. Huntingburg, Indiana. Yeah. The attendance for this card was over 3,000 based on the gate because of $4 and $5 tickets. We did almost $15,000. Ringside, which seated 600 people, was sold out well in advance. The population for Huntingburg is 5,073. And but again, spot show matches. Dutch Mantel and Coco Ware beat Masafuchi and Mr. Onita at Sushi Onita. 3 stars for a 10-minute tag team match at a spot show. That was the best match of the night, and that's all you need at a spot show. They made a fucking fortune that night. What did you want to end on?
Well, let's end on this. 81-22, there are two very interesting things. One about the empty arena match, tying into everything with Lawler and Funk, and the other about a match that people today, some people still consider the best match in MSG or the best match in the WWE, Patterson versus Slaughter, the alley fight.
Oh, okay. Well, and actually this clears up. Somebody was confused as to exactly what date the Funk Lawler empty Coliseum match took place, because it wasn't obviously advertised because there were no fans there and there were no tickets sold to it. And I had been told at the time that Funk flew in and they did it the Monday afternoon before the matches. And this verifies that, because somebody else was saying that they couldn't narrow down the exact date that it took place. So it was April 13th, 1981. And it says the rematch of the century took place and nobody showed up to watch it. Terry Funk issued a challenge to Jerry Lawler to wrestle him when no one was there. Funk had complained that Lawler had the fans, the referee, the police, and everyone else on his side, and he wanted a match with nobody there except for a film crew. The bout took place at 1 o'clock in the afternoon with only Lance Russell and 2 cameramen present. During the match, Funk and Lawler fought all over the Mid-South Coliseum. Funk tore up the ringside steps and had a jagged piece of wood he was going to use on Lawler. Jerry kicked Terry's hand, trying to knock the stick out of his hand. Instead, the force of it sent Funk's arm up and the stick hit Terry right in the eye. Funk's eye became so bloody the tape had to be edited for TV. Terry yelled for the match to be stopped, so Lawler was declared the winner. And that was his review of the empty Coliseum match. And then the May 4, 1981 Madison Square Garden card.
How about that third match on that card?
Peter Maivia pinned Rick Mcgraw with a backbreaker over the knee. It says Maivia is even fatter than Hippo Harley Race. We liked Harley, but Harley in 1981-82, he gained some weight.
Oh, he destroys Harley in a few of these here.
Yeah. And on that card in Madison Square Garden, WWF title Bob the Bum Backlund versus Angelo Mosca. That got 1.5 stars. The main event was Tony Gurria, Rick Martel, and Gorilla Monsoon substituting for Andre the Giant against Stan Hansen, Lou Albano, and Moondog Rex, 2 stars. Oh, I'm sorry, they put the midget match on last. Carolina Kid and Farmer Jerome beat Sky Low Low and Kid Chocolate, 1.5 stars. But the alley fight, you know, this is good because most people, I guess most fans of any kind of classic wrestling have seen the alley fight, Patterson and Slaughter. They've seen it on tape because it exists. It's out there. It was a famous match. So this will give you an idea of where that match placed in terms of matches that you didn't see, that Weasel saw. His description is, Pat came out wearing an I Love New York t-shirt, blue jeans, cowboy boots, and a New York Yankees cap, which he threw out to the crowd, obviously because he was the babyface. Slaughter entered the ring wearing what else fatigues. Patterson attacked him at the start of the bout. Pat took off his belt, hit the Sarge with it, and used it to choke Slaughter. Later on, Pat used the boomerang move, to throw Sarge head first into the ring post, which opened a pretty bad cut on his forehead. Pat took off his cowboy boot and hit Slaughter on the head with it several times. He also rammed the Sarge into the ring post a few more times. The Grand Wizard threw a white towel in the ring, so Patterson was declared the winner. I've been watching the MSG card since last September, and this was easily the best match that I have ever seen from there. 14 minutes, 13 seconds, 4 stars. The best
4 stars
WWF match that he had seen at that point, and one of the most legendary matches of all time in that company, got 4 stars because it was so far and above anything else you saw from the WWF at the time. But it wasn't as good as shit we were seeing in Cincinnati and shit we were seeing in Louisville and Memphis.
That show. Look down.
Live events.
May 5th. Let's end with this because it's the same sheet. May 5th, Louisville, Kentucky. Talking 4-star matches.
Okay, well, and this was Crusher Blackwell's, actually not only his Louisville debut, the only time we got to see Crusher Blackwell. And a lot of AWA fans in 84, 85 are going to go, huh? There was a window of time from about, 1979 to early 1982 when Crusher Jerry Blackwell was better than Bam Bam Bigelow. He was better than Vader. He was the best big man in the business, better than anybody that would come along before or after of that shape. It was a very short window, but it was there. And because
Vince tried to get him. He was one of the first guys Vince tried to get from the AWA, and he decided at the last minute not to do it.
And within 2 years, he was back home in Georgia in ill health running an outlaw group because the weight caught up with him and he didn't take care of himself. He had high blood pressure, sleep apnea, the whole 9 yards. But the main event, May 5th in Louisville, Jerry Lawler versus Crusher Blackwell. Blackwell was brought in by Jimmy Hart, trying to get the bounty on Jarrett, trying to put Jerry Lawler out of wrestling like he had been with the broken leg. And anyway, so he was bringing in Hulk Hogan, the Funks, the people like Blackwell. And I remember this match. It was amazing. At the start of the match, they stand in the middle of the ring and the referee calls for the bell, and Blackwell jumps up at 6 feet tall and 460 pounds and drop kicked Lawler right on the chin. And the whole place went, oh boy. We didn't, because me and Weasel were the smart fans. We'd been watching Georgia TV, and we knew that Southeastern, the incarnation of Southeastern under Barnett, had used Blackwell. But a lot of people in the Gardens had only maybe seen a little TBS cable and never seen him live. And they shit themselves. And then Weasel goes on. I was amazed at some of the things Blackwell did. Flying knee drops, elbow drops, leg drops, big splashes. Blackwell gave Jerry a power slam, which was better than any other power slam I've ever seen. Blackwell threw the King out of the ring, gave him a flying elbow drop on the arena floor. Back in the ring, Lawler threw Crusher into the turnbuckles. The Force sent him over the top rope onto the ring apron, and the big man then landed out onto the floor. That Crusher Broomfield one-man gang, when he was with ICW, the reason why they named George Gray Crusher Broomfield was a takeoff on Crusher Blackwell because he was the only guy that size they'd ever seen that could do that shit again. Anyway, Blackwell missed a big splash off the ropes. Lawler quickly covered him for a 3 count, 13 minutes, 16 seconds. I was impressed that a man Blackwell's size can do the things he does. His quickness is unbelievable. I wouldn't mind seeing him again at 468 pounds. He's phenomenal. And that was a 4-star match, about the same length of time and the same rating that he gave the alley fight.
The day before.
The day before, he gave the day after to Jerry Lawler and Crusher Blackwell. And I would have to agree in its own way. They were completely different matches with different stipulations, but they were as good as they could be given the circumstances. And we still have to, and we're going to do more on this because coming up in June of 1981, there's a booking lesson here, and we can do a segment on the program, which we will probably maybe even next week, on how Jerry Jarrett managed to create a concept and in 3 weeks use it to nearly sell out the Mid-South Coliseum on the 5th show of the month when they'd been there for 5 weeks. And that was a tribute to, basically, I've said this before, booking is not telling guys how to have a great match or coming up with an amazing new move or an exciting new gimmick or stipulation. Booking is putting the talent you have in a position to sell the maximum amount of tickets possible based on getting people interested in what those individuals are doing in relation to each other, not just guys hitting each other over the head with blunt instruments. And this is one of the classic examples of that. I will tease you with when Jerry Jarrett invented the dream match. Not the dream match we have in modern days, but the dream match that they sold out the Mid-South Coliseum with. We'll pick up on that next week, okay?